Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, where we believe living with intention through a bucket list lifestyle is a great way to bring yourself personal joy. As you are crossing items off your list, you're actually filling up your bucket. The more items you cross off, the more joy gets added, until eventually your joy spills over into the lives of those around you. My name is Roger Williams, and as the host of this show, I will be interviewing guests, people just like you that are crossing items off their own bucket list. My hope is that by hearing these stories, you will be inspired and empowered to cross items off your own bucket list. When you find something impactful for your journey, we invite you to share the episode with one other person and leave an honest rating or review of the show. This is an amazing way for you to gift those feelings of inspiration and joy to others. Now let's start crossing it off together.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast. I'm glad you guys are here. I'd like to welcome you guys to the show. I am Reena Friedman-Watts, host of the Better Call Daddy show, the safe space for controversy. I am very excited to introduce to you today Roger Williams, who is a daddy, a father of three, author, head crosser offer of his bucket list, and the voice you usually hear on this show. Roger, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Reena, or thanks for being here. I'm excited for this, and I appreciate you doing this for me.
Yeah, I am very excited to find out what you have crossed off your bucket list this year.
Yeah, so the major one for me was drop 52 weeks of episodes of this show without missing a week. That was a huge deal for me.
That is a big commitment. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, I knew when I started this, whether it was going to wind up being a hobby or it was going to wind up being something that I could monetize, I wanted to do it properly. And for me, part of that was knowing and reading about pod fade. There's so many podcasts, they say there's 2.9 million podcasts on Apple, but I've heard a statistic recently that only like 60,000 of those are truly active that are putting out episodes on a weekly basis. So I knew that if I wanted it to go anywhere, I had to have some consistency there.
Yeah, consistency is important not only in podcasting, but also in business or in starting really anything. I also am curious, like, how much research did you do, like, prior to just crossing this off your bucket list?
Yeah, well, it's like starting the podcast from just in general to this point. Like, I was not a huge podcast listener. Like, I listened to one or two, but I'd done some YouTube stuff and didn't really enjoy doing storytelling that way. Whereas I knew I probably could figure this out. I took radio classes in high school. I took theater in high school. I have some kind of background in it. I've always enjoyed the internet and working with the internet and trying to figure things out. But for me, like, it really boiled down to I have a friend that's a very, very avid podcast listener. He listens to lots of different podcasts, lots of different genres. And so before I started, he was the person that I went to and said, "Hey, this is my idea. What do you think?" And he said, "Sounds perfect." And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Because I've watched you. I've been in your presence when you have met total strangers and got them to tell you their story." And so he said, "You're just natural at this. You're curious, not judgmental. You've done this most of your life." And he said it was just, he wasn't too sure of the niche, like being bucket list, but he's like, if that's what you think you need to do, you're going to be good at it. And I kind of didn't believe him at first. Of course, I think when you start something new, you always have some kind of imposter syndrome, regardless of who you are and what's going on. And so for me, I knew that if I just put in the reps, and that may sound like mechanical or robotic, but if I just put in the reps, that eventually I would get better. It's that whole 10,000 hour rule. I'm way far away from that. You're probably close to that 10,000 hour rule on the podcast side. But I just knew I just had to keep doing it, and luckily it's something I love doing, so it's pretty easy.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like repetition makes you better.
Oh, for sure.
It really, and this goes along with the theme of your podcast, but it is about the journey.
Mm-hmm.
I am also interested in how you found your guest, and how did you find the balance between people that are approaching you and want to be on, and then the ones that you want to go after just because of your own personal interest?
Yeah, so that was something that I had a niche for this podcast. I had a format. I even had a script that I was going to use. I told myself I'm going to use the same script every time, and that's kind of gone out the wayside. But it's, for me, it was like, okay, where do I find guests? I just, I'm a big fan of Google. You just type stuff in, and it tells you where to go and what to do. So, when I first started, I found, I asked some friends. My first guest ever was someone that I found on YouTube while I was researching my Camino de Santiago trip, and just said, she would be a great guest. And so I just reached out. So there are lots of different websites you can use that are specifically trying to match podcast hosts and podcast guests back and forth. So I use it for both reasons. Some of those, there's a good word of mouth. When I first started too, I was like, hey, do you know anybody else? After I get done recording, I'm like, hey, do you know anybody else that's crossed something off their list? Or I'd ask friends and family members. Like, I got a couple of that way, kind of word of mouthish. And then the other thing that I probably shouldn't do as much as I do, but I literally use hashtags, whether that's on Reddit, IG, Facebook. I just hashtag bucket list, and I go through and I find people that I see that are doing cool, interesting stuff, and I just reach out and say, "Hey, would you be interested to tell a story on a podcast?" And see what they say. So I do have some intentional things, like I wanted to interview somebody that had done the Burning Man, because that's something that I had on my bucket list, but I wasn't real sure about it, so I still wanted to keep it there. So I went to Reddit, which may or may not have been a bad choice, but I went on the Burning Man forum, posted that I was looking for someone that had done the Burning Man as a bucket list. Kind of stirred up a hornet's nest a little bit, but that's fine. But eventually found somebody that was like, yeah, I'd like to do that. It was on my bucket list. I'm 60 years old. I did it when I was 60 with my daughter. He goes, I want to tell that story. And so uh, to me, there's like two kinds of guests, right? There's what I would call the professional podcast guests, right? The people that are even like myself. I would put myself in that category where I'm like trying to promote the show, trying to promote my book, trying to promote all that stuff. And then there's the non-professional podcast guest, right? The person that doesn't do this on a regular basis, that when you ask them and say, hey, would you think about telling your story? They're like, ooh, no, I'm not sure about that. So I have a lot of close friends that have done the show for me, thankfully, and just some people that I've reached out to that aren't necessarily professional podcast guests trying to pitch something. And I love all my guests, and I think we have a great guest on this show. But the people that aren't trying to pitch something really kind of light my fire a little bit, because they have no reason to be here doing this except the love of telling their story to the audience. And so, to be all honest, like when I do the editing, I like those episodes. I kind of like handle with kid gloves. Like I'm really trying to make that person sound good because they're not a professional at this, and so I take very good care of that, and I've had good feedback from those type of people, like, oh my gosh, I thought that was going to be horrible and that was awesome. And so I enjoy doing that, and I enjoy being able to present that to my audience, that it's not just somebody trying to sell them something, but it's just somebody telling their story. So going through and searching hashtags is a good way for me to find those folks.
I feel like you don't even really hear that so often. So I like that you mentioned that. And I also am curious, like, about the hornet's nest that you disturbed. So what happened when you posted you were looking for somebody with
Oh,
that bucket list item?
yeah, I mean, this is probably too much of a story that I want to get into, but the I think when something like a Burning Man gets to be really big, that there are people that become self-appointed gatekeepers to events like that, and they have a certain way they think it should be run. They think the mindset should be those kind of things. And so there were several people that were like, a bucket list goes against everything Burning Man. Yeah. You folks at home can't see your face, but you were kind of shocked by that. But it's like they felt like having a bucket list was in the antithesis to like the Burning Man experience, because you're going and just experiencing, and you're not. And that's, it was good for me to have those conversations with those folks because it really sharpened my philosophy that no, that's a misconception of a bucket list, that it's just all about consumerism and keeping up with the Joneses. That's a misconception, and it can be thwarted if the right person is out there telling the story. And it's like, no, a bucket list is about experiencing things, and it doesn't have to be. It is engaging with whatever you're doing. It's not just crossing something off a list to cross something off, like a chore list. But it really is, if you have intention behind it, it really can have great meaning. And so that was, again, it's those reps, right? I mean, it's like I want people to challenge me because I want to have to defend it, because I'm going to go on some podcast someday to promote all this stuff, and someone's going to ask me to defend it. So I want to have those answers. And the only way to have those answers is to have those reps. So of talking about it, and I was, as kind as I could be, but there was definitely some pushback.
Yeah, I mean, I truthfully love myth busting
Mm.
and people offering a different perspective than I might have thought existed. So that actually brings me joy from my podcast. And speaking of joy, what has been your biggest joy that has come from doing this?
Oh wow. I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it was just falling back in love with storytelling. My background is youth development, teaching. I was a history teacher, so a lot of my job was telling stories, especially from diverse perspectives, trying to integrate those into the classroom as much as I could. I was a youth pastor before that. And so that was all about telling stories, especially from the Old Testament, where that's what it was about, was a history of storytelling, and telling those stories over and over again, and people figuring out what those were. So yeah, just falling back in love with storytelling. I think I grew up in a family of storytellers. My mom would say that my dad always wanted to be the funny man in the room, and didn't succeed most of the time. But and I got a little bit of that. I don't tell stories about myself on the podcast, but I think that's really good. That's one of the things I enjoy about it, is I'm helping other people tell their stories. And so that's been one of the biggest things for me, is just like, I don't know if I've said this to you before, but it's like I record 2 3 months sometimes in advance of when the episodes drop, and so but I edit them probably the week of or the week before so that they drop. So it's quite a bit of time in between when I record and when I drop those episodes, or when I edit them. And I'll be trying to think back in my head, 40 interviews ago, what was this interview like? And in my head, I'm just like, oh no, it wasn't good, it wasn't good. And then I go back and edit these episodes, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is like perfect. Why did I ever think that this person didn't do a good job, or that I didn't do a good job, or and because the story's there. And so that's what's been really exciting for me, is to be able to tell other people's stories about this thing that we call a bucket list lifestyle.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like I record months in advance so that I'm not like up against the wire. But honestly, even the day before it airs, I'm like typing up the summaries and coming up with the title and like
Sure.
re-listening to
Oh
it
yeah.
one more time all the way through to make sure it's exactly what I want. So, but I do think it's good too to like let a little bit of time pass because
Mhm.
then new ideas come into play.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's one of the things that I've had, if I'm looking at what I needed to learn, or what was challenging for me, was that I had to learn how to be flexible and inflexible all the same time while doing this. And that's a trick, and that's a feat. So sometimes I think, I have to be flexible to, like, one imperfection is flexibility, right? You have to be flexible with yourself if you're going to be imperfect. And so I like to do the editing. I like to do it, and I like to make sure that it's good. But I'm also like, if there's one little thing or one little bobble or what, I mean, like, I'm just like, I got to move on. It's really good. I had someone that did an interview with me that said they thought I had a team of people behind this. It's like, nope, just me, you know. And so I know it's good. It's good enough. Right. I mean, I've done so many podcast interviews for other people where they're like, let's adjust your microphone levels and let's do, and I'm just like, let's just go. let's just do this. This is and it's if you spend all that time doing that stuff, then you miss out on the stuff that's really good. And I think being flexible just with myself to be like okay for things to change, right? So like even the opening bumper to the show that I put in after the cold open, I think I'm on my I yesterday I just recorded I think my fifth version of that'll start being inserted next week. And it's just like it's okay. It wasn't, I'm learning, the audience is always growing. It's not like it's going, people are going to be like, back 25 episodes ago you did, it's like, no, let's just keep moving, make it better each time, right? And that's the goal, and not worry about the mistake I made. I think the one that's on here right now is, or the one that was on here was a little bit snake pokey, right? like I'm a proponent of, bucket list isn't, necessarily what you see on Instagram. And so I had something on there that was like, I probably was not being very nice. I mean, it probably sounded nice, but I'm like, I need to change that, so I just change it. I'm not going to go back and change all the other episodes, the previous episodes, but I'm going to move forward. So that's that flexibility of not being perfect or not having everything done, that kind of thing. And then the challenge on the other side of that is to be inflexible. And so, like, one of the things that I've had to do, when we were talking about acquiring guests earlier, is that I've had to be really inflexible sometimes with people, of saying, I'm sorry, after the fourth or fifth email, you're not a good fit for this show. And that was really challenging to me, because I'm like, one, there was a time when I was like grasping for guests. I'm like, I don't want to say no to anybody, because then I'm going to be short guests. But at the same time, I want to protect the theme of the show, the niche, and the audience that I'm building, that I want them to be able to be comfortable knowing that they're going to get the same thing every time they come back. And not the same story or the same person or the same guest, but they're going to get the same feel of the podcast and the theme and where we're going and what we're trying to do each time. That doesn't change. That there's some familiarity in each episode that comes from keeping that. This is about a bucket list. This is one item. This is, we're going to talk about where it came from. How did you accomplish it? How did it change you? And what's next on your list, right? That all might look different in each, those four components might look different in each episode just a little bit, but they're all four there in some way. And so that was really important for me, which is really weird, because most podcasts, independent podcasters like we all both started, usually have some kind of transformation in their show. Like they start off doing one thing, and then they go do, they figure out that they're better at something else. And I've never gone through that. I said, this is the show, this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it. And 60 episodes later, I'm still kind of doing the same thing. Still focused on bucket list, still focused on helping people, hear other people's stories about that activity. And I haven't really changed the format of the show in the first two seasons.
Well, this interview right now is switching things up though a little bit.
I did this last year after the end of season one. So this is a continuation. You weren't the guest host, but so I'm trying to get different people each year to kind of do it for me. And I've thought about doing it in the middle of the year too, as a mid-season thing, because, as we'll get to in a little bit, pretty hard to pick most memorable favorite episodes when you're trying to pick out of 51. That is, last year when I did this, I only had 10 episodes out, so it was like, that was real easy. I picked three, that's a third of the total episodes. I'm golden. People can't be that mad at me now. I've got like 51 guests that would be like, why didn't you pick my episode? Why didn't you pick my episode? So yeah, so I want to try. This is something that I did ingrain into the first season that I'm going to keep on trying to do.
I like it. Let's go to those memorable episodes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, so like I was saying, it's been an insane year for me, because there's this 51, like I have an actual body of work, right? I mean, that's, I heard somebody say that the other day, and I felt that. I was like, there's this body of work out there that even if I stopped tomorrow, would still be there and would still be generating, downloads and listens. And so it's really hard to look back over a whole year and say, okay, what was most impactful? So, I mean, I guess I would start with episode 20, which was receive a full ride college scholarship. And the guest was Corelli Sanchez. And part of the reason that episode is so memorable to me is because Corelli is former student of mine that I asked to come on the show and talk about her college experience that she was having so far, and and receiving a full ride college scholarship to college, which was one of my tasks and jobs when I worked with her, was to help her do that. So it was a lot of fun to hear her do that. She was super professional. She's only a sophomore. Yeah, she's only a sophomore in college. She was super professional with it. She understood the concept of what we were talking about, and she told her story really well. And she was really brutal and honest about her college experience. And so my hope is, like with most of my episodes, is that the SEO, search engine optimization, when someone says, how do you receive a full ride scholarship to college, that this episode will pop up and they'll hear Corelli's voice and hear her story, especially as a person of color, going to a private school, getting a full ride scholarship. That can help dozens and hundreds of people if it can get out there. So that was one of the main reasons why it was so memorable to me.
Let's hear a little of that episode.
What were some of the things that you think, being a first gen student, were difficult for you in that position to make some of these moves to go to college and to get a full ride scholarship?
It was definitely a process. It was something that I didn't really think was ever possible, just like going to college as a first-gen student, because you don't have your family to show for experience for that. It kind of just like in my household and in many households probably, it was pretty much like either you go to school or you work, and it never really seemed like you could do both. And so for a long period of my life, I thought, okay, time to go to work. But I was really driven at school. I enjoyed learning, and I had big goals that did require an education. And so that was also a part of it.
I love that one of your most memorable episodes was from a shared experience.
Yeah, that kind of seems to be a theme in these. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, mine too, like in my episode with Jerry Springer that, we did together, the specialness of the episode is that we actually knew each other. And I think that is such a big differentiator when podcast guests bring somebody on that they've known for 20 years. It's a deeper relationship.
The judgment's all gone at that point, right? If you have a relationship with somebody, the judgment's gone, and then there's all that's left is curiosity. So it makes interviewing those people, so much interview. That's why it was so great to interview Corelli. Worked with her for 4 years, all through high school. So yeah, it was really easy, and she wanted to do it. And the other thing I think too is that she wanted to do well for me, right? There's a repayment to me. So there's lots of different things that are ingrained in that, and I think you can hear that in the episode, even not knowing that we know each other real well. There was just some familiarity and understanding and smoothness that was just existed because we had known each other for so long, and it worked so hard to help her achieve this bucket list item.
Also, you made another really good point. When there's mutual interest, when the other person wants to do good for you and you want to do good for them, you feel that.
Yeah, for sure. I felt that when I was on your show, right? It was like, we had known each other a very short time, but I had high amount of respect for you, and your show is older than mine, has more episodes, has more downloads, and so you've been around doing this for a while, and I just wanted to do the best job for you that I could, because I respected you and what you do.
Thank you. That's sweet. Okay, let's hear about another memorable episode.
Yeah, so keeping with that theme, I think episode 30, host a destination wedding with Dayton and Hallie Wiseman, was also very important to me. They described it, having a destination wedding on their bucket list where you take everybody in the wedding party and go someplace. Theirs was Costa Rica. And part of the reason that that episode is so special, there's two reasons. Part of it is because they not only like had their wedding there, but like they brought everybody in their wedding party down the week before and the wedding, like for the whole week, and like hung out at the beach and did activities together and really like brought their family of friends together, like because a lot of them didn't know each other, so they all had this chance to bond as a community before this actual event, right? Like, so most times you may have seen the person, somebody else in the wedding party, the bachelor party, or the the bridesmaid party, or whatever it is, but they spent like a whole week together, and then slowly brought in members of their family, so that by the Thursday before the wedding, there's just there's 50 plus people in this small town just all supporting them, all having spent time together, all knowing each other. So when the wedding came, like you could feel at the reception that there was just like familiarity, and it just, and that was a real intentional thing for them. And that's what I thought was so special about that interview, was hearing especially Dayton talk about that this was intentional activity. They intentionally did this to make their wedding different than something else they had seen before, and so that was really cool to me.
Let's hear a little of that episode.
But I'd say our main motivation for trying to do a destination wedding was we wanted to get our friends and family to experience something that we really care about. Obviously, we met you hiking the Camino, and travel is a big part of our lives. And so we wanted to really take in as many people as we could into an experience that would let them know what it's like to travel.
The second reason that I really liked that episode is because I crashed that wedding. So what we did is I interviewed them about their destination wedding, and then we turned the tables and they interviewed me about crashing their wedding. So that was just a whole lot of fun. It was nice to be able to hear all about their desires for their wedding, and then be able to come and tell them, yeah, I saw that. I saw that took place, that community building and all that was real and active. So that episode, a lot of fun for me. Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show.
I love that on so many levels. I mean, it's like a grand crescendo for the wedding. I mean, you guys are all getting to know each other, and how awesome for a community to come together and like really support what you're doing.
Yeah, well, my partner and I actually crashed the day of the wedding. Like, we came in at the reception, so they had no idea, even though that there were friends of ours between us, that we hung out the night before the wedding. Like, they all came to our Airbnb, and I fixed them a Costa Rican meal, and we hung out all night long and swam in the pool and did all that stuff. Like, the bride and the groom did not know that I was going to be there. That's a whole nother story. And we explain that in the episode after theirs. Yeah, I think that's episode 31, where they interview me. I talk about it. I talk about why that happened, and how that came to be, and how we made it happen, because it was like Mission Impossible. Like, place they got married was like this huge, massive resort that had its own hot springs, and it was guarded. Like, everywhere there were guards and stuff. And so my partner and I went through a whole process to be able to even get to the point where we could get to this wedding. But we got there right on time, and yeah, we kept it a secret, and they said it was like one of the best gifts they had received all year was us showing up. And so yeah, it was a ton of fun.
I feel like we need more experiences like that in life. There are so few. I mean, I'm really glad too that it like panned out and that worked out. But otherwise, you would have had another story.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that the success of that is a lot has to do with the fact that I'm very intentional. I have an intention for my bucket list. So my bucket list is not all about, but a good percentage of the items that get put on there are about community, whether that's strengthening existing community or building new community. The items on my list are about community. So I knew if I was going to crash a wedding, that it was going to be somebody I knew, that they didn't think, so I went through this whole process with the bride of getting her to believe that I was going to be in Europe and not be able to be there, so they're like, in the interview with me, they're like, so number one thing is lie. I was just like, well, yeah, kind of. So, but because that's my intention for my bucket list is community, it makes saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go crash my friend's wedding very simple, right? And it's very purposeful, right? And it's just driven, and it just makes it so, like, yeah, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And so that's what made that episode so special for me.
I love it. Now I want to do that too. I'm like, oh, actually, I'm like, I do have a wedding coming up. But yeah, the unexpected. There's so few unexpected
Yeah,
moments.
in Costa Rica, like we had to fly to Costa Rica, like they had no concept that we would be there, but we were there the whole week, just like everybody else, just didn't get seen. So
I love that. That's so good. Okay. Now what's the last one?
I have two more. I have to do two more.
Okay.
Episode 49 is Make Amends with Dying Mother, Margarita de Margarita. And this is a super powerful episode. She has a very triggering backstory that we, definitely had to delve into. That I had to put a trigger warning on the episode saying, hey, this is, there's some stuff here that may do this. If you need help, go to this place, or stop listening and find somebody to talk to, because her story is just super powerful. But I really wanted to include it in this season because it was important for me to show people that bucket list items aren't always these grand adventures or visiting honeypot destinations. The bucket list items can be just about anything that you think would probably bring you joy. And so in my book, I have a chapter that's all about creating your bucket list. And in it, I think there's like 15 different prompts that you ask yourself, like, do I want to buy something? Who do I need to reconnect with? There's all different kinds of prompts you can use to create your list if you have that intention, right? If you've set that intention, it makes, answering those prompts really easy. And so buying something, for me, buying something, there's something I want to buy that's on my bucket list, but there's only like one thing. Like, it's $25,000. It's a comic book, and it'll be one day, but it's not, it's not, it's not something I'm going to do tomorrow. But it's very, but besides that, I don't want to buy a Lamborghini. I've never liked sports cars, and never, I don't even need a house. I'm just like, I want to go places and do things with people that I love, or like getting to know, to love. And so I want to put my money into experiences, not stuff. And so for that prompt, I tell people, I'm like, this may not be for you. That's okay. Challenge yourself, right? Um, to try to put something on your list that comes from this prompt. But if you can't, move on. And so, relationships is one of the prompts. Who do you need to reconnect with? Who do you need to forgive? Who do you, make a list and say, okay, these people are on my bucket list. I need to reconnect with my friend from middle school that, I used to be best friends with, and then something happened, right? I mean, you can put those things on there. And so this was a great example, very tough example of someone that did that said, okay, my bucket list, I'm going to put, make amends with my dying mother. And so that was a real tough episode to do as a host, but it was also, I thought, real important and powerful to share with people, that to show that it's just not go to Angkor Wat or go to Cappadocia, Turkey, and fly in hot air balloons, or that it can be something that's not consumption based, is what I would say.
So I listened to that episode, and there was a lot of trauma there. And I think actually, when there's estrangement, or when you haven't talked to a family member in a lot of years, it is really like being willing to work through a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as far as the energy that it takes to do that compared to like walking the Camino, I'd walk the Camino at, 790 kilometers for a month any day of the week, than have to go through the kind of stuff that she went through and the kind of, um, hardship and learning and forgiveness and all those things that she went through. That's a lot of work, a lot of energy, very draining. And so, I admired her for doing that.
I'd love to hear a little bit of that episode.
I don't know, that moment of seeing someone mistreat my mother, it like flipped the switch because I always speak about forgiveness. And it flipped the switch. And to see the bruises on her from her falling and them never notifying me and just the awful neglect they gave her. So I brought her home and I started talking to her just because she never explained anything to us. And the forgiveness came through conversation.
Could you relate to her because you yourself have repaired things with a family member?
Um, I think it goes both ways. I think that I have some family members that I haven't been able to do that with, and I have been able to do that. I was able to do that with my father 20 years ago before he passed. So that was really good. So, I again, like I said in the very beginning, I don't try to like interject myself a whole lot. And the most important thing is for her to tell her story. Sometimes I interject my stuff when I feel really, at ease, or I think it's important or valuable, or connects things in the show. Sometimes I'll do that, but I mean, I was just sitting back, just trying to make sure she told her story, that she got every chance. And we had technical problems, and we had we had to reconnect to Zoom, and it was a little bit of a nightmare, but she hung in there, and we got it done. And to me, that's I'll probably listen to it one day and be like, oh yeah, and see it from a different light. But at the moment, it was like I got to capture this. This is valuable and important.
Yeah, so it's funny because going back to the fact that you record and then sometimes don't air it for 2 months and then you re-listen. So a lot of times it'll be somebody's birthday, or I'll see a post that one of my previous guests have done. And then I'm like, I want to re-listen to that. And sometimes it's now like 2 years later. And then you're like, and now I like want to like reach back out to them and find out updates of what's going on with their story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So back to the whole, you're building a portfolio of work and you're building a network and a community of people.
Right.
That you kind of want to know like what's happening in their lives now.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. That's been another great benefit to this, is that there's this little bit, of a community, or people that I can go to, or people that I've strengthened their relationships with that were previous relationships, through this process. My friend Scott Maitland, he was on the bubble as far as getting on this list. He drove the Pacific Coast Highway 1 with two of his buddies, did a road trip this past year, and I played poker with all of them online during the pandemic, and that was just a lot of fun, to reconnect with him. And he had been inspired by the show to go out and do that trip, and so it was really cool to just be like, hey Scott, come in and talk about it. And again, somebody that doesn't have anything to sell anybody else, except his experience. And so it was a lot of fun, and he walked away thinking that was awesome.
Okay, now I want to hear another most memorable episode.
Yeah, well, that would probably be yours, episode 42, interview Jerry Springer. And we've kind of already touched on a little bit about why those. And again, we had a relationship before, just even through Instagram is where we met and how we started having a relationship. And so for me, again, I really wanted to tell your story. It was that kind of thing where it's that relationship thing. It's like you hadn't spoken to him worked for him for a while, hadn't spoken to him for a real long time, trying to rekindle that, for professional reasons, but also for some personal reasons too, that we found out in the episode. So I was really excited to do that, and to tell your story, because you're somebody that I admire and want to make sure that I get it done right.
The questions that you seriously asked me were so good too. Like they were very thoughtful. You're like, did you feel it was genuine? Did you get to ask everything that you wanted to ask? I mean, it was so awesome that you got to capture that right after I did it.
Yeah.
I mean, what a special interview. It really was. I treasure it. I think you did an awesome job. I loved the questions that you asked.
Right.
What was also a big takeaway for me was the fact that all of these accolades, all of his fame, all of his accomplishments, and what it boiled down to, all of it is that, you know, he cares about his family. And that really, I felt like, went with the theme of my show.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to being curious, not judgmental, right? I mean, it's like if you and I were sitting in a Starbucks and you had just interviewed Jerry Springer for your podcast, we would have a conversation just like that. What was it like? How did you feel? You know, I mean, even though it's kind of the format of the show, it's just natural for me to ask people those kind of questions and to be curious and inquisitive, and really, because I really want to know people. A lot of that comes from my dad. I think he was a salesman for many years, but he wasn't a snake oil salesman. He wasn't a used car salesman. He was like a good guy salesman. Like, he didn't lie to his customers. He didn't cut corners. He was, if he said he was going to do something, man, if he didn't get it done, he would just beat himself up. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from for me, is just watching him ask people questions, and not only just doing that for the sake of doing that, but doing it for the ability to one day recall that information and make that person feel good about the information that you heard. And sometimes I'm a little hard on other people. I think, can't you be more thoughtful? And when I say that, it's not about being polite. It's about having more thought. It's being full of thought, right? Are you thinking about what's going on around you, what people are experiencing? Do you have any empathy? Like, you have to be thoughtful to have empathy. You've got to be thinking about other people. And so a lot of that, whether you want to call it skill or whatever, comes from my dad.
I love that comes from your dad. And I'm hoping that my dad's going to give us a little clip for this about his bucket list item, because even though you asked him, he kind of skirted the question in our episode. So we're going to get a little bucket list reflection from my dad. So today, Dad, was really cool. I got to guest host the Crossing It Off podcast. I had been on the show before, right after I did my interview with Jerry Springer, and he had been on my show. And we did like a year-end wrap-up. And one thing that he still wanted to know was, what is a bucket list item for you in 2023, or just in your life, that you would like to cross off your list?
Well, I probably have a very strange list of what my bucket list really would mean. Some people would think, I'd like to go to every state in the country, in the United States, and visit every one, or visit every country or most of the countries all around the world, and be able to travel and be able to, learn other people's cultures. I wouldn't mind doing that myself, but more importantly to me is if there was a way. I think I told you when I was a little boy, I really wanted to cure some of the ills of the world, and if I could have learned how to do some genetic engineering and be able to fix genes so that we don't get sick, where we don't, where we have a chance to prolong life in a healthy way. To me, that's fascinating. To go to a way of figuring out a way to not live 70 years or 80 years or 100 years, but to be healthy and maybe to be able to live maybe 1,000 years, so that I could actually see the legacy that we bring out on this show, the Better Call Daddy show, where I could see different generations of my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren, and to be part of their lives. To me, that would be fantastic. That's the ultimate dream, is to be able to be part of your family's life through many, 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 many generations. But to be able to feel it and touch it and be part of it. How's that for a wish to put on your bucket list?
I think it's unique because I don't think everybody would want to continue living. You said you'd like to live 1,000 years. I don't think most people would want that.
Well, that's because we see the decay of one's mind and body, where somebody they think has had a fruitful life and they live to 100 years old or 105, or they lived to be 100 and even 120. What kind of condition are they in? What can they really do or participate? Part of life is being in motion and doing things and learning things and being able to hopefully always have a progression in your life. That's not only purpose of life, but that's what meaning of life is to be able to be in constant motion. That's how you measure time. It's the distance that you travel and how fast you do it. And I don't want to do it in 100 years. I'd like to be able to travel and do everything that I can do. I put down 1,000 years as a minimum. It wouldn't bother me if I could live 5,000 years. Be part of everything going on and all the improvements, hopefully in technology and in humankind, and to be part of that, I think is a wonderful dream.
All right, 5,000 years until you kick the bucket.
You got a deal.
I love it. And everybody should subscribe to the Crossing It Off podcast. Thank you, Roger, for letting me and my daddy be a part of your season finale.
Thank you, Roger. If you can give me any added years, I'll take it.
Happy holidays and a happy new year. I'm also curious, like, what's coming up for you now that you're at the end of this second season?
Yeah, as far as the podcast goes, I think it's, one of the major things is, guests. I've already got episodes recorded through March of this upcoming year. So I have, someone that crossed off swim with sharks, somebody that performed magic for Elon Musk, somebody that's given a TED Talk that was a part of their bucket list, and a couple that I didn't know what this was, but became members of the Century Travel Club together as a couple. And basically that's, you visited 100 countries. So as a couple, I think they've been married 20 some years or something, but they visited 20 countries or 100 countries together and crossed it off their bucket list. So that one's coming up soon, and I'm really excited about that. So just, maintaining that level of interest and excitement about the guests and what they've crossed off, and that same with that kind of diversity, not just of stories, but of guests. So I've been real proud this past year as far as representation goes. 60% of my guests have been women, and a little over 30% have been either people of color or those that come from diverse lived backgrounds. And I just really, because again, I want anybody and everybody to think that this lifestyle is obtainable. When you look at Instagram and look at the hashtag bucket list, all you see is Cappadocia, destinations that are far away and cost money to travel to and all that kind of stuff. But you can have a bucket list without all those things. So I'm glad that we've shown that representation over the past year. I'm going to be trying to increase accessibility along the same lines. So I am in the process of transcribing all the shows so that they'll be available on the website of the podcast in text. And I think that that's really important and valuable to do. Most people at my stage of the game, and as an independent podcaster, don't do that, especially going back. And I'm trying to backlog all the episodes that I've done. So it'll be easier once I get that process done. But it takes some time, and it's not free. So I'm doing everything I can to make that happen in Q1 of next year. Next season, to be able to have that available to folks so they can, whether it's just because they want to read it or they want to go back and check something or whatever it is, there'll actually be an individual page on my website for every episode, and it'll have the ability to listen to the show notes, and the transcript to try to make it as accessible as possible. And then the big news is that starting January 3rd, I will be dropping 2 episodes a week, which is a massive change for me, and workload and all those kind of things. So I'm excited to be able to do that. And I still have enough content already stored up and recorded that I can get through March, going 2 days a week. So it's just a matter of trying to keep that up. And it's something that I know transitioning to more of this being a professional or world-class podcast that's a standard thing that happens. And I'm excited to tell people more people's stories and get those out there and get more people inspired. So it's a little bit of a big task, but I think it's worth doing.
Congratulations. I mean, that is growth right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big deal. I'm the show is currently in the top 10% of podcasts worldwide. And I'm doing everything I can to expand that. I want the audience to be diverse and broad, and the show's listened to in 69 countries around the world in this past year, which I'm super proud of. And at the same time, super weirded out about because I don't know why the show's been downloaded 135 times in Russia or 35 times in Iran. I mean, it's just it's like, what is going on? I kind of know what's going on, but it's very interesting to me. And I've also gone out of my way. We think Apple's like the largest podcast streamer, but in other places of the world, it's not. And in some English speaking countries, it's not. India is one of them. So I just this past week got approval to be on India's largest podcast streamer across that country. And so the show's available there. And I'm just, I'm doing everything to get it out there.
Amazing. So what's on the bucket list for 2023?
For me, that's I've been holding on to visiting all 50 states for a while. I need to get that crossed off. It was supposed to be during my 50th birthday year, which was unfortunately 2020. So that did not happen. So I'm hopefully going to visit North Dakota and Alaska and get that done, get that out of the way. Majority of the American population only visits 12 states in their lifetime. So, to be able, having say I visited all 50 is a huge deal for me, just because I love this country. I love the diversity of all the places. And so I'm excited about that. I'm in the process of writing a memoir. I did publish a book last year about bucket list creation and management and intention, but this is more of a memoir style story about my dad and I and my son and my grandpa. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I also want to attend the World Championships barbecue in Memphis, Tennessee. I have two friends that I've been friends with since middle school, almost 38 years. And so we're talking about getting that done together. So I'm excited about that. And then I just learned of this. I don't know, people probably know about, but I just learned of this great website called workaway.info. And basically, you can go there and find essentially jobs that pay you room and board in other countries, all around the world. It's huge, it's huge, huge. And so I had on my bucket list to go and work in like an animal sanctuary in Africa, someplace. And that's kind of morphing into doing this work away program, because you only work like 20 or 25 hours a week. And then the rest of the time you have to yourself, but you still have housing and 2 to 3 meals a day, and they feed you and stuff. So cheap way to travel the world. And for me, that Africa trip was going to be about giving back. So I'm looking at maybe possibly visiting Morocco for 6 weeks. That way I could do 2 or 3 of those work away programs, stay in the same country, not have to like have a bunch of flights and everything, and keep the cost real low and spend some time in Morocco. So those are the big things I'm looking at this year to potentially have being able to cross off by the end of the next year.
You think you'll be doing any diving in any of those locations?
No, I'm not a big fan on diving, but I would snorkel again in a heartbeat. I have snorkeled the Great Barrier Reef, which I know a lot of people do, but mine is because I just don't want it to disappear before I get a chance to see it. It's it's such in such danger that it's just like, I gotta get this done. I gotta get that done, not because it's a list item and I gotta check it off, but it's just like, I don't want it to disappear before I get a chance to get there and see it. So that's one of the things I want to try to do, but probably won't be next year.
Okay, well, don't disappear. Let people know how they can find
Oh,
you
sure.
and your podcast. And
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you so much for this amazing opportunity of letting me guest host. I am truly honored, and I hope I did a great job for you, because I wanted to.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I knew you would do a good job. You do such an awesome job on your show, and it was a joy for me to be on there. And I was excited that you said yes. It means a lot to me. Growing new friends in this industry, in this sector, and I've been very honored to be able to have access to you and now my listeners. So I'm excited for that. Thank you.